Welcome everyone to another LinkedIn live stream. This time we have a special guest, another interview, and happy to have him here. Keep in mind that there's other interviews as you look through what's on YouTube. If you happen to miss one of the previous live streams, or if you're seeing this now, do go to the YouTube channel because there's other live streams recorded there and other topical. So part of our conversation today will be on technical practices. And we have a whole playlist that Paul's put together around that as well. So take a look at that. And a couple of things to keep in mind as people are coming in. Do look at the webpage also for upcoming classes, events, workshops, etc. Go to R9 Live, r9.live to get more information, not just on training, but other ways that we might be of service to you. It could be presentations, keynotes. It could be just kind of coaching conversations, chalk talks that might get you some ideas to get you going. So do take a look at r9.live. That'll kind of send you in the right direction. If you're on the Rocket 9 website, you'll find all of our classes there. And on our YouTube channel for supporting information. Sometimes it's not in classes. We just find it helpful. So all of our live streams are there. But we have other topical interesting things you might like as well. I think there's over 100 videos on the Rocket 9 YouTube channel. So do take a look at that as well. I mentioned we have a special guest today, so I'm going to be inviting Paul Moore to join us in just a moment. Paul Moore is a technical Agile coach and trainer, does a lot of the Certified Scrum Developer and Advanced Certified Scrum Developer courses. He'll tell you a lot more about that in a moment, but I want to make a mention that when we look at practices, that's part of why we want this conversation. All these companies and teams are going Agile. What does that look like and mean? But in particular for your teams, and Paul is one of the few technical coach and trainers out there that can do the Scrum Alliance's classes for the team level practices. Been around for a long time, tremendous amount of respect by those who have worked for him. I've known Paul for a long time. It's always been the case. I think one person called him a real diamond. It's hard to find these folks with these kind of skills and can do the type of things that Paul can do. So I'm so glad that he's here. I'm going to bring him on now and ask some questions there. He is. Hey, welcome, Paul.
Hey, Scott. How's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
Good.
I know we talked some about what was on your mind before, but maybe to kind of set the background a little bit for people who don't know you, or what does that background even look like? Can you catch us up a little bit on your background history, as far as Agile and software?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I've been in the industry for quite a while, and I've actually got 10 years of non-Agile, pre-Agile experience that in the last team that I was on failed miserably. Company went out of business, failed miserably. And that taught me that there had to be a better way to do this stuff. And that was when extreme programming, when Scrum was coming around. And I was fortunate enough to learn from those people that created those methodologies and to see, an AB failed miserably, able to deliver in 2 weeks. It was that kind of, distinction to me when I first learned it. And that sold me on it. And I've been doing it ever since.
I can relate to that, seeing the real results of that. So as part of that, very commonly, this is one of the main things we wanted to talk about. And I think it's a little controversial because when we're talking about what would we call this this LinkedIn live session, your recommendation was to call it "Don't Send Your Teams to Scrum Master Training," right?
Yeah, respectively, please don't send your teams to Scrum Master training. And part of that is that, Scott, and I'll ask you, my very first Scrum Master training, we had an exercise to cap the class that was building a pamphlet on doggy daycare. I don't know if you remember that one,
I
but it was
do.
like iteratively building a pamphlet of the services that were available, sprint by sprint, and it was fun. We had a ball doing it. We learned incremental delivery, but as a software developer, it's like, what do I do with this information?
Right. Right. I
And
think. Go ahead.
thinking back to other classes, the XP game where we blow up balloons and we fold origami hats, and again, iteratively, incrementally delivering value. The marshmallow challenge, we collaboratively build a tower with marshmallows. It's fun, it's team building, but it's not software development.
Yeah, and I think that to me has always been the issue because for those who don't know me, I have a background in programming, not nearly as extensive as Paul's, but I always feel the same way. Like it's more complex than that, and I would certainly, I think most people agree that the way we build software is different. So when a company says, "Hey, we want to go agile," and you're kind of saying, okay, that's fine. I mean, I imagine you would agree people should get training, but you're saying don't send them to that class. So when we talk about what you teach, which is the Certified Scrum Developer class from the Scrum Alliance, what's the difference between the Certified Scrum Master class that everyone seems to know about, and that's the
Mhm.
one place to go? What's the difference between that and the Certified Scrum Developer class that you teach?
Yeah, so the Certified Scrum Master class and the Developer class both have the same foundational learning that we teach. But in the Scrum Master class, you dive into the Scrum Master role, facilitation, serving the organization, serving the product owner. Whereas in the Developer class, we get hands-on with unit testing, test-driven development, refactoring, working together as a team in a collaborative manner to deliver software. And in my class, we deliver code. We've got exercises where we're writing code.
Right. So the nice thing is when we were chatting a while back about this, you said the value and the way that we work in that CSD that you're focused on about collaboration. And what do you see? I guess when we talk about traditional ways that people might think of programmers and programming and developers, we talk about they put the headphones on, it's heads down, they
Mhm.
won't talk in the retrospective. What is it that you're liking to see open their eyes to and shift a little bit in the developer training versus just generic agile training or Scrum Master training? What are you hoping to cultivate there?
Well, if you think back to why it's called Scrum, the rugby analogy, it's moving the ball forward as a team. It's not, I've got the ball and I'm going to, take care of it and then hand it off. It's moving the ball forward. And through force of habit, the way we've been trained in school and the way we're evaluated on jobs, we typically work alone. So we try to work alone. And if we get stuck, we table that thing, we pick up the next thing and work on that alone. But that doesn't get put through the team. If
Right.
that doesn't get features into the customer's hands.
So what type of approaches, and I know some of this we'll get into in just a moment about what's the advanced part, like the advanced CSD. But if you're bringing them in, one of the things that you'd mentioned is, we're mobbing from day one. So this idea of working together, can you describe for those who don't know, what would that look like? 'Cause especially now in today's remote world, how are developers working together? But yet you're doing that in the class where they're working together
Yeah.
right at the beginning, right?
Yeah, and so back in the day, extreme programming talked about pair programming, where you got two people working together on the same problem, and that was extreme back in 2000. People have actually taken that idea and said, well, what if we get more than two people? What if we get a couple of developers and a QA voice and a product voice working together on the feature at the same time? And the whole point is to eliminate delays, get the feedback loop short. So if a question comes up, we've got the people around us that can say, oh, do this instead, go that direction. We're not waiting for an email reply. We're not waiting for somebody to sign off on something. We get it done and we deliver it.
Yeah, and if I'm wanting to, because a lot of what who we're talking to, so if we're working with, I'm usually involved in the companies who are saying we're going to go agile, what should we do, et cetera. Why should I care as a manager of the engineering department or group? Why should I care about how's that gonna help us as a group? You talk about moving the ball forward, but specifically, what have
Yeah.
you seen that's actually like, ouch, it doesn't need to be so rough. If you guys would try these approaches, it might look differently.
Well, I think the classic example that we can all relate to is that on a lot of organizations, the developers do their work, and very near the end of the sprint, they hand it off to QA. And QA is all of a sudden slammed on the last day or two of the sprint, and they start to feel like it's their fault, but it's not. It's the fact that we haven't worked together to validate and verify that we're building the right thing and that it's working as expected throughout the sprint.
Yeah, I know I've been asked the question, which is funny when someone had once said, so what are the QA folks doing the first 9 days of the sprint? So, but it's this idea now, and
Yeah.
I think some of that's folded in. I'm thinking through uh, what's in the CSD and what's in the ACSD. Some of this is my challenge would be I don't always know if the dev team realizes that that's a problem, that we shouldn't just check out the code and hold it for 9 days, or it's going to take us 2 weeks to finish. I'll give it to you on the last day. How is it that we're shifting mindsets of approach to development work differently, such as smaller units of work or test-driven development? So what's happening with the mind shift of developers to move into an agile way of working that gets us to not be on day 9, throwing it over the wall and crossing our fingers that QA will manage to test it?
Yeah, and that's actually come up over the years that I've been training more is realizing that there's a whole approach to problem solving and feature delivery that involves taking this big feature and just delivering it in small slices. and in my viewpoint, day by day even, that we can show progress, get feedback on it, and consider it to be done. And once we get all those increments done, we've got the feature out there.
Now, if I'm going to play devil's advocate here. If I'm, let's say I'm the product owner and I'm sitting in our grooming meeting or product backlog refinement meeting, I say, okay, I'd like this feature, 1, 2, 3 vote, they all vote. Wow, it's a 40, it's going to take up the whole sprint. And I might say, well, can't you give me a part of it? I'm the product owner. I'd love to see a piece of it on day 2 or 3 or 4, but the dev team's going to say, sorry, no, we can't. How are you helping shift them to say, actually, there is a way? How does that kind of conversation play out to move them off of, don't go monolithic whole thing, break it down? How does that
Yeah.
shift?
So even in the Certified Scrum Developer class, we've got 2 different techniques. One of them called example mapping, where we take the story, break it down into examples and rules that embody that example. And then we also do story splitting. How do we take this bigger feature and just be able to show small pieces of it to the point that we might be able to deliver these pieces and just defer those to the future?
Okay, I'm going to press a little bit more, but you've been good so far. So let's imagine I hear this. I'm like, okay, this is great. I'm going to go talk to my team. Hey, team, I've been hearing about this training. It's going to help you guys. It's a certified Scrum developer. What do you guys think? My guess is they're going to say, no, we're good. What are they not? What are they missing that they don't realize? Actually, I think it would help because they feel like, hey, look, I know Java really, really well. I'm a good programmer. But you're talking about some other things that aren't really about the technology.
Yeah, well, Scott, something that I notice in the class is that as a developer, I learn languages, I learn frameworks. I don't necessarily learn how to work together with other people, and I certainly don't learn how to approach problems in different ways. If I've learned a way to solve a problem and that served me well in my career, that's pretty much what I'm going to stick to.
Yeah.
And here in the class, I'm saying we run one exercise where I show 3 or 4 different ways to tackle the problem, depending on who the user is. It's not a matter of this is the one way to slice the story. It's like, well, we could go this route, we could go that route, we could go that route. Which one's going to be the best for our solution?
I love it. I love it. Opening their eyes to different ways. Another very common problem I hear all the time on my side, working with management, is we have too many knowledge silos. And I know parts of what you're working with these team members on in the Certified Scrum Developer class is helping tear down those knowledge silos. What's happening in the class that helps us address that problem?
Yeah, a lot of companies that we see, a lot of teams that we see, you've got that one key member on the team. If they're out sick, that work doesn't happen. And just by the mere fact that we can pair up with them or, get them in a small group and work together, we start to understand their part of the code. So really this whole notion of the collective code ownership just naturally happens when you're working together. If you're not working that way, it's usually, oh, this is my code, nobody better touch it.
Yeah, I always remember it stuck out to me so much from Extreme Program about collective ownership. I thought there's the problem. And I know it's a part of it. So let's shift into it because at a 30,000 foot level, tell me what's in the 2-day Certified Scrum Developer class compared to the 2-day Advanced Certified
Okay.
Scrum Developer course.
Yeah, so in the Certified Scrum Developer course, we do lay a solid foundation of why Agile. I mean, both why it came about in the 90s and why I still think it's valid today. We do cover the Scrum events, the artifacts, the roles, all the necessary components of Scrum. But I for sure get into technical practices that are going to serve you, whether you're part of a Scrum team or an individual developer. Things like using unit tests to verify that the system's behaving as expected. That was, the big game changer for me. It wasn't like write a bunch of code and then go, oh, is it working or not? It's here's how I know the code's going to be doing the right thing, and then I write the code that does it. It's really flipping development on its head.
You just made me realize, like, I know you've done a recent post. I'm going to pull something up for folks who haven't seen it. I'm going to do this now. This is a recent blog post. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Here we go. Test-driven development slows us down. And you put this post together this year. And touch on some of this is the resistance you get. This is a quote I'm imagining you probably have heard from developers, right?
Yeah, and anecdotally, I'm working with a client right now where across 5 different groups, we've tried to write one unit test for an existing body of code, and it was taking us 60 to 90 minutes as a small group of people. We had expertise in the domain, expertise in the language, expertise in TDD and unit testing. And if code isn't written to be tested, it's just hard. And as a solo developer, I'm going to be like, yeah, I've got real work to do.
Yeah, that ties into something else that you brought up, and that is, and I hear this all the time too, legacy code. We have a legacy system, and we have a lot of problems with that, and that's kind of inherent in that. How are we taking some of this mindfulness? If I'm going to say, I'm a developer. Like I hear you, Paul. That's great, but I'm stuck with this legacy system.
Mhm.
What might that look like for me?
Yeah, and so that does get into the distinction between the Certified Scrum Developer class and the Advanced class. In the Advanced class, we tackle legacy code from the ground running.
Hmm.
It is how do we put tests around it? How do we have confidence that the tests are giving us the feedback we want? How, like, having a target of test code coverage is really meaningless. I mean, that's a whole different conversation we could have.
Uh,
But once we've got some confidence that we've got tests covering it, how do we start morphing that code and changing it to be expressing the ideas that we want, leaving it maintainable for the future, and getting rid of all those connections that we've got to other parts of the system, other applications, other things that are just bogging this little bit of code down.
and I want to be clear for those who are listening. What you're describing as an approach is just a way of working. We're not talking about like here's how you clean everything up. Stop all the work for 7 weeks and do a big massive cleanup effort. Right? You're talking about as a way of working, sprint in, sprint out. They can work
Yeah.
themselves out of some of those corners that they're stuck in. Is that right?
Yeah, and in fact, my first recommendation with legacy code is don't touch it. If it's running and providing value and nobody wants it to change, just leave it alone. Unfortunately, somebody finds a bug or a new feature needs to come in, and then we've got to start, tackling it.
I like that. The other part of that, usually part of that conversation is technical debt. I think that might be one of the most used, but you and I were chatting
Yeah.
earlier. Most used, but maybe not acted upon. Tell us a little about technical debt, and you in the class you cover how to measure it, et cetera. Give us some your 2 cents on technical
Yeah,
debt.
so that is one of the funny distinctions between the Scrum Master class and the Scrum Developer track now. In the Scrum Master class, they do talk about technical debt in the first class. I actually defer technical debt to a whole topic in this advanced class where we talk about, how can we measure it? How can we, pay it down? What can we do actively to avoid incurring technical debt? And we talk about the metaphor that Ward Cunningham came up with. There's reasons to take on debt. You know, there's reasons to have a mortgage. There's reasons to have a car loan. Those are good examples of debt. But I think a lot of teams, they get the credit card and they just run it up and they don't really know what the balance is.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think that ideas, at least making it visible and then deciding what to do is good. I'm glad you covered that. You just mentioned the track. Let me pull back up something else for everyone else. Then that is the track itself from the Scrum Alliance. So walk us through. There's a progression here, and I have it on the screen. Step one, step two. When are people ready for the first one? When do they take the second one? What does that look like on the progression, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I would say anybody on a development team doing Scrum, even doing, more generic Agile, not specifically Scrum, you're ready for that first class. And in fact, you could take the advanced class without taking the basic class. You may not get certified the same way. But with the basic class these days, we give a shared understanding of Agile. Because like everything else, Scrum isn't the same thing that it was when it was first derived. It's now the latest version of Scrum, and here's what it means, and here's how we work together to deliver results using it.
I think that I'm going to pull up also the advanced because some of this is an issue around what you mentioned some of the things that are in the advanced class. I want to highlight that because that is the rare one, and I think in my opinion as well is this is where we begin seeing practical application, the real practices we're doing that are going to help us change the way they work. You talk about feedback loops. We can find out immediately that we're on
Mhm.
track, that this is actually going to compile and run. We don't need to find out on day 9. If I'm hearing you right, part of this is yes, take the Certified Scrum Developer class, not the Certified Scrum Master class. But I'm imagining the value you put on the advanced Certified Scrum. It's not just for the architects, the leads. You're saying really everyone, if you're doing in Scrum team, you should really take the advanced as well, right? That's the practice.
Yeah. The advanced class is where we really dive into a lot of the details of the extreme programming practices. And we also start teaching you how to become a better team member. There's sections on listening. There's section on giving and receiving feedback. I kind of liken it to the basic class is for everyone. Now, how do I start making myself more like a tech lead, a senior developer on a path to becoming a technical coach?
Yeah, which I love it. I love the idea of the technical coach. I think this puts it on tracks. Like you made such a good point. This isn't about your knowledge of a particular language or the syntax. It's like be a better team member and build software in this way better. So we don't have the experience like you shared, and I've certainly been through a few times. Part of it is for everyone that's listening is that people might have said, I've never heard this class. I didn't know that was a thing. You know, we're going to get training. I saw the CSM and maybe we'll do an Agile 101. Part of this is you ran the numbers by me, both in the number of years and the number of people. I just want everyone to consider, if I'm looking at Agile at my company, I'm looking at the teams, think about the number of developers, testers, et cetera, you have on your product development team. Think about how many product owners you have, and think about how many Scrum Masters you have. And now, Paul, you mentioned those numbers that you were reviewing with me were stunning.
Yeah, and I just got these from the Scrum Alliance last week. So if we have a group of 100 people and we talk about the certification breakdown, I'm just going to double check. 73 of those people are Scrum Masters. 25 of those 100 are product owners, and 2 of those are developers.
Yeah.
And that's just where the training has gone in the past and the awareness of the Scrum developer not quite being out there. I think we've got some work to do still to get the word out.
Yeah, and on an encouraging note, and Paul's been involved in this with the Scrum Alliance as well, is how do we refactor the course itself? It used to be a 5-day class. Can you imagine giving up your team for 5 days? Made it really tough. They've refactored it. It's 2 days of the basics, as Paul was talking about, 2 days of the advanced practices, and lots of good stuff in there. A lot of the challenges we see on teams just delivering is simply that the teams haven't been walked through all of this and then also shown a better way to work. They still work the way they are. They're just trying to stop, start in 2-week cycles. Other than that, they're not really stopping. They'll say things like, well, it's going to take 6 weeks. I know we're sprinting, but I'll keep saying it's not done. And I'll show you what I've done. It feels a little bit like, Scrummer fall-ish. So do take a look. And there's other videos for those who are interested and you like what Paul's saying. He does have some other videos on our YouTube channel. I mentioned the feedback loops one, which is really good. There's another great one on the hole in the Scrum framework. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that. So do take a look at that as well. I pulled up the listings. Go to rocket9solutions.com. There's an area just for the Certified Scrum Developer class. You can look at the upcoming classes as well. Go to r9.live for other areas because, in my opinion, if you're doing an Agile transformation, this is what you would want to do for your team members. Fold them into the core foundations from a developer or team member's perspective, as well as actual hands-on practices. But like Paul said, you're mobbing from day one. You're actually in the IDE doing the work. It's not making paper airplanes and things like that. Your team will say, well, that's cute, but really I got work to do and this isn't so simple, right? So we'll end that. Hopefully, Paul, we'll have you come back. Would love to dive in a bit more. It's been a pleasure. Everyone else,
Thanks, Scott.
see you guys in the future. Thanks, everybody. I just wanted to make a quick note. We had a great conversation with Paul Moore about the Certified Scrum Developer and Advanced Certified Scrum Developer classes. We have a special offer to take advantage of. Use the code LILive-CSD-D3R, and that's the number 3, D3R, to get 10% off of the training. Again, that code's LILive-CSD-D3R to save 10% on getting your team registered for Paul's classes. Hope to see you guys there. Thanks.